Okay, good evening, everybody. It's Monday night, so it's another Parsha class. This week is Parsha Shoftim. It's not a long Parsha, but it has a lot of halachas and mitzvahs in this Parsha. The pasuk opens up with a mitzvah that's incumbent to Ban Bezdin, or really it's on the community. The pasuk starts off by saying Shoftim v'Shoftim titan l'cha b'chol she'erecha. It's a biblical obligation for people to have judges. That's a shofet, is a judge. And a shaited is a policeman that enforces the rules of the judges. So the Torah says, it's mandatory to make judges and policemen in all your gates, meaning in every single city in Eretz Yisrael, there was an obligation to set up a judiciary system. Now, there are different levels of Bezdin. Like, for instance, monetary issues was able to be done with the Bezdin, a court of 3. Capital punishment needed 23. The Supreme Bezdin was 71. There was always an odd number in a Bezdin. You can't have an equal Bezdin, because if you have 70 and 35 judges say one way, 35 judges say another way, so in English it's called a hung jury, but you can't have that in halacha. So there always has to be a majority, an odd number that you can have a majority. Now, just in passing, in monetary issues, a majority of 1 is enough. So let's say 3 say guilty, 2 say guilty, 1 says not guilty, the guy has to pay the money. When it comes to capital punishment, which again, the minimal court is 23, but if 12 people say guilty and 11 people say innocent, the person will not be guilty. You need a minimal, by capital punishment, you need a minimal of a majority of 2. That means if it's 12 and 11, 12 say guilty and 11 say not guilty, you're not going to get capital punishment. So you're basically going to need a 13 guilty and 10 innocent. Then you have the 23. But that's not for now, that's just impossible. So we know that everything in Torah that Rebbe teaches us is a lesson in our day-to-day living, how we're supposed to live as Jews. What is the lesson and the moral of Shoftim v'Shoftim titan l'cha b'chol she'erecha? Giving judges and policemen to enforce the rules of the judges. So it says in Moses Svarim, it's brought down many, many places. This refers to the gates within the person. What is the purpose of a gate? The purpose of a gate is you go in and out. By a person's body, we also have gates. We have eyes. You see things. You can go in and out with sight. You have ears. You know, your ears are gateways for things to go in. You have your nose. Okay. The Torah comes along and says that a person needs to understand in any gate that you have, any gate that the person has, you need to put a judge. Not only a judge, but also a policeman. So what does that mean in a practical sense? Well, you're about to say something. It's a gate, right? Your mouth, you put things in, you put things out. When you're about to say something, you need to make a judgment call. Should I be saying it or shouldn't I be saying it? That's a judgment. You have to have a judge. Something comes into my mouth, a judgment. Should I be eating it or shouldn't I be eating it? So, in fact, it says an interesting thing. Many people are more careful what comes into their mouth versus what comes out of their mouth. Now, people are very careful and cautious, but when it comes to language, putting down people, foul language, whatever it may be, they're very easy to say foul language. So the Torah says, Shoftim v'Shoftim titan l'cha, you need to make a judgment call. Should I be saying it? Shouldn't I be saying it? Should I be eating it? Shouldn't I be eating it? Should I be seeing it or shouldn't I be seeing it? You have to make a shofet, you have to have a judge. And then it's not enough only to have a judge, you need a policeman to enforce it. Then you have another thing called the ears. The ears, the question is, what am I hearing? Should I listen to it? Shouldn't I listen to it? Or my nose, should I smell it? So to speak, in a spiritual sense, people say the expression, I smell something over here. Are we smelling, should it be something that I'm smelling or shouldn't it be something that I'm not smelling? This is the question that a person needs to make a judgment call. They tell an interesting story with the Rebbe Tzimchaya Mushka. There were Bachrim in the house that used to help. They were always there in the house helping out. So one time, the Rebbetzin's sitting in the room doing whatever she's doing, and the phone rings, and the Bacher, one of the guys in the house, answers the phone, and he's in the same room where the Rebbetzin is, and he's talking to the person. And from the conversation, it was obvious who he was talking to. Finally, he gives the phone over to the Rebbetzin, and he says, they want to speak to you. So the Rebbetzin asked, who is it? So the Bacher told her who it is. And she took the phone, she spoke. After she finished the conversation, the Bacher couldn't hold himself back. And he said to the Rebbetzin, I don't understand. You're sitting right next to me. You obviously heard the conversation. From the conversation, it was quite clear who it was. Why did you ask me who it was? And it's interesting, the Rebbetzin said to him, from the time we were children, we were taught that something that you're not supposed to listen to, you don't hear. The person was talking to you. They weren't talking to me. So why should I hear what somebody's talking to you? And it's a remarkable concept. And in fact, it says in Svarim that all those gates of the person, Hashem made gates to the gates. B'chol sharech and all your gates. The mouth, you have the lips. The eyes, you have the eyelids you can close. The ears, you can either put your fingers into the ear or close it up with the earlobe. You have things, every gate needs a shaitan and a shaitan to know what I'm allowed to say, what I should be saying, what I'm not supposed to be saying, and so on. Okay, then, at the beginning of the Parsha also, the Torah says like this. It speaks about the laws of witnesses. This is the source of a lot of laws, this Parsha, of kosher witnesses in Torah law. So the Torah says like this. What happens if somebody was worshiping idols? They convinced people to go worship idols. So the Torah says, you have to bring them to the gate, you have to stone them if it was proven that they committed the sin. So the Torah says like this. Al pi shnayim eidim, based on the testimony of two witnesses, shloisha eidim, or three witnesses, yumas hameis, the person could die. Lo yumas, a person will never be given capital punishment, al pi eid echad, based on the testimony of one witness. In order to give capital punishment, or for that matter, lashes, one witness is completely invalid. There must be two witnesses. And the Gemara asks the question, the Torah says based on the testimony of two or three, if two is good, why does the Torah tell me three? So there's a lot of things in the Gemara, but I just want to say one interesting point. The laws of witnesses in Torah law is completely illogical. It's completely illogical. There's no logic to the laws of witnesses. For instance, there's a law, let's say you have 10 witnesses. And of the 10 witnesses, 2 of them are related. And they all come to testify. The din is because 2 of them are disqualified because of the brothers, one of them of the 2 is disqualified, all 10 are disqualified. It's called in halacha edus shabatla miktsasa batla kula. If part of the testimony is no good, it's all no good. It's illogical. But I still have 9 kosher witnesses. Okay, 2 people are brothers, so one's out. But I still have 9 kosher witnesses. No, if they came to testify and one of them is not kosher, all of them are not kosher. Another illogical thing in the laws of witnesses, that 2 2 witnesses and 100 witnesses are exactly the same. Somebody would think logically 100 witnesses is better than 2 witnesses. So if it's 100 against 2, logic dictates you should listen to the 100. It's 100 versus 2. The Torah says no. We're going to learn out all these from these psukim over here. Today, Kameya, 2 is like 100. They're the same equal power. Not one. One could only extract money, or extract, not even money. You can only extract a shvur, an oath. But I'm just saying the laws of witnesses are completely illogical. And then the Torah says, I'm going to mention it because it's relevant to what I'm going to explain now. What happens when 2 witnesses testified against the guy for capital punishment? The din is the witnesses are the first to kill him. Because they testified, it's a clear puzzle. The Edom are the first ones to kill him. They're the ones that do the actual capital punishment. Okay, so again, we mentioned that everything is in a personal life. Okay? So before we get into a personal level, there's another important thing that the Medrash says. At the end of Chumash, in Parsha, we're getting close to Parsha Zahazinu, Moshe Rabbeinu is speaking to the Jewish people, admonishing them before he passes away. And there's Parsha Zahazinu, the famous Parsha, the Song of Hazinu. So over there, the pasuk says, Hazinu Hashemayim v'adabeira, listen, heaven, and I will speak. V'sishma ha'aretz imrefi, and the earth should hear the words of my mouth. So the Medrash says, and Rashi, by the way, brings this down, okay? So why is he speaking to the heaven and earth? Moshe Rabbeinu says, okay, heaven listen, earth listen. Why is he speaking to the heaven and earth? So Rashi quotes in the Medrash, Hashem is saying, I want heaven and earth to testify. They're the witnesses. They're going to testify if the Jews behave or not. Because they're always here. They're never going to die. The heaven is here. The earth is here. Witnesses come and go. According to the heaven and earth, they will always be here. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, heaven listen to me and earth listen to me. You're going to be the witnesses. How do the witnesses punish the person? If they're guilty. So here the witnesses punish the person. The heavens don't give the rain and the earth doesn't give its produce. So there's a mamish, as the Medrash explains, there's mamish, the laws of witnesses. Heaven and earth are testifying that if the Jews keep Torah mitzvahs, they will give their produce, the rain and the produce. And if they don't, so they deserve destruction. So then the heaven and earth are going to be the witness. Okay, that's very important to what we're going to explain now. There's a pasuk later on in Tanakh, not in Chumash, in Navi. The pasuk says, Hashem says to the Jewish people, Atem Eidai, you are my witnesses. The Jewish people are my witnesses. Now, what does that mean when Hashem says that the Jewish people are my witnesses? Like, what do you mean they're my witnesses? So the Rebbe explains that what is the concept of a witness? Why does a witness have to give testimony? Something which is obvious, you don't need testimony. I don't need witnesses to testify now is night. It's obvious, it's night. I don't need a witness to testify that a chair is a chair and a table is a table. It's obvious. What's the purpose of a witness? Somebody borrowed money. The guy said, I borrowed. The guy, you borrowed. The other guy said, no, I didn't borrow. So what do witnesses do? Witnesses actually reveal what happened. Somebody, God forbid, committed a murder. Nobody saw. So what are 2 witnesses? The concept of a witness. What is the concept of a witness? A witness comes along and reveals that this is what happened. So the whole purpose and concept of Eidim is to reveal something hidden. That's the purpose of a witness. Just even in practical law. What do witnesses do? They say the guy took the loan. The guy didn't pay the loan. The guy damaged. He didn't damage. He ate. He didn't eat. I mean, whatever. So the witnesses reveal something which is. When Hashem comes along and says to the Jews, Va'atem Eidai. Okay, what do you mean the Jews are my witnesses? So Chassidus explains that Atem Eidai means, what is a witness? Revealing something hidden. The function and role of a Jew is to be God's witness. What does that mean? To reveal godliness in the world. Godliness is hidden. You look out in the world, you don't see godliness. What is the function of a Jew when doing Torah mitzvahs? They make the world holy. They make the physical objects, they make them all holy. So what's the purpose of a Jew? The purpose of a Jew is to create and reveal godliness in the world. That is the function of a Jew. But then the Rebbe takes it a step further. And the Rebbe explains there's two types of witnesses in halacha. In halacha, especially according to the Rogatchover and Alter Rebbe, and where the Rebbe learns it, some witnesses are there to verify something happened. Okay? A guy committed a murder. You don't know did it happen or not. So the witnesses come and testify that it happened. They're not making it happen. They're not making the murder. They're verifying that the murder took place. A guy lends money. Okay? The guy lends money to somebody. The borrower denies it. So what do the witnesses do? They don't make the loan. They verify that the loan took place and the guy didn't pay back. So most witnesses, interestingly, are there to verify. Therefore, if the borrower and lender both agree that, yeah, I borrowed money from you and I owe you the money, you don't need witnesses. If everybody agrees I smashed your car, then you don't need witnesses. Because they're not making it happen. They're only verifying that it happened. There's two exceptions to this rule in halacha: marriage and divorce. And we're going to speak about marriage. You know, when you ever go to the chuppah, you ever go to a wedding ceremony, they designate two witnesses. Okay? They designate two witnesses to watch the ring giving. And by the way, based on what we said before, if you ever notice, they call up the two witnesses, they designate the witnesses, and then they sometimes say, they don't have to, but sometimes they say to the exclusion of all others. Why do they designate witnesses? Why don't you just have two people watching it? Because under the chuppah, you have fathers and mothers and brothers-in-law and aunts and uncles, relatives that are invalid witnesses. So if the cousins, the uncles, the aunts, the fathers, have in mind that they're testifying, then you don't have any kosher witnesses, even though you have two kosher witnesses, but you also have other relatives. And we learned that if you could have 10 witnesses and one's not kosher, all 10 are not kosher. So what do? By designating the witnesses, you're basically halachically disqualifying anybody else from testifying. And therefore, there are no other witnesses there. They could be watching it. They could be seeing it. But halachically, they're not witnesses. So therefore, you don't have a bunch of witnesses that one of them is not kosher. You only have exclusive two witnesses, and therefore nobody else can disqualify the chuppah. Okay? Now, so what do you need two witnesses? The chassan gives the kala the ring. He says, you are consecrated to me with this ring according to the laws of Meshunis. Okay, then they become mukadeshes. The kedushin is valid. What happens if a chassan and a kala, boy and girl, go into a room by themselves? The chassan gives the girl a ring and says, nobody was in the room, just the two of them. They come out and they say, we did it. We did Arayat Mukadesh Sleep. It is completely invalid. There's not even a question if she's Ashes Ish. It's completely invalid because you must have witnesses. But if the witnesses are only to verify, it's verified. Everybody agrees. Just like the lender and the borrower agree, you don't need witnesses. If the chassan and kala both agree, I gave the ring, I got the ring, and we did Ariyat Mukadesh, why isn't it valid? It's not even a doubt in Chesed Kedusha. It's not even a doubt of a Kedusha. Why? Because witnesses of marriage and divorce are not there to verify. Part of they're called AD Kiyum, meaning it's not AD Bitter to verify that it happened. AD Kiyum, witnesses of marriage and God forbid divorce, make it happen. They're part of the process. They're not to verify. The Torah says when a man gives a woman a ring, part of the process is that it's done in front of two witnesses. They're not verifying because if everybody agrees, it's still worthless. So there are AD Kiyum, witnesses that make it happen. The Rebbe explains what type of witnesses are the Jews. Are we verifying? Are we verifying God's existence? Or are we actually making it happen? And the Rebbe says that when a Jew does Torah mitzvahs, they are not verifying that the world is godly, they're making the world godly. The remarkable thing. It's not just verifying it's happening, I'm just verifying. No, we are part of the process. We are making it happen. And therefore, there's an interesting law when it comes to witnesses. What happens if two witnesses say, 100 witnesses, I don't owe money. And I come along and I say, I do. I do owe money. Even though 100 witnesses testify against me, but when it comes to monetary issues, I can go against witness to obligate myself to give money. I can come along and say, I borrowed $1,000 from somebody, and the witnesses will tell me, no, you didn't, but I still have a right because it's my money, my ownership of money, my ability when it comes to money is stronger than the testimony of witnesses. But not on our body. Or not when it comes to do a sin. If a person comes to Beis Din and says, I killed somebody, or I stole money, or whatever. If it's a sin, in secular law, if a guy comes to court and says, I killed A and B, I killed him, that's the best admission. Admission is guilt. In Torah law, if I say I killed somebody, peasant says, go home and have a nice day. You cannot testify against yourself in when it comes to an Aveda. A person cannot testify against himself when it comes to an Aveda. In money issues, yes. In body issues, we're not, we don't control ourselves. I can't do to myself whatever I want. It's not my body. It's God's body. It's only Hashem's money. It's Hashem's body. It's not mine. So it's a very interesting concept that the Jews actually function as Hashem's witnesses in the world. And again, what type of witnesses are we talking about? Not witnesses that verify, but witnesses that actually make it happen. It's part of the process of Dira B'Tachteina, making a dwelling place for Hashem down here, is through the testimony of witnesses. Okay, then you have another interesting pasuk in this week's Parsha. The pasuk says about not doing witchcraft. Get back to the Parsha. The Torah says, Tamim tihiya im Hashem Elokecha. You should be complete, or the Rashi said, you should go with sincerity in the presence of Hashem. Yeah. The Torah speaks about not doing witchcraft. Don't follow the ways of the Canaanites that did witchcraft and all that black magic stuff. And then the Torah says, Tamim tihiya im Hashem Elokecha. Rashi says, go with him with sincerity. Literally, Tamim means be complete. Tamim tihiya im Hashem Elokecha, but Rashi says it means you should go with sincerity. But the Alshich HaKadosh, has an interesting interpretation of Tamim Tihiya. It's really a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. It says also, "B'makom she'ein ish, ishtadel ish." In a place where nobody's around, there's nobody to take over. Take over. B'makom she'ein anoshim ishtadel ish. But there's another interpretation of that Mishnah, which is similar to what the Alshich says on this pasuk. It says, "B'makom she'ein ish," when nobody's around, be a mensch anyway. The true test of a religious Jew, for instance, is not when people are watching. That doesn't mean anything. The true test of a religious Jew to be complete with God is when there's nobody around at all. And not only nobody around, it's impossible for anybody ever to see what you're doing. You're in a room that's blockaded, no satellites can get in there, nothing. And over there, you're a religious Jew. Or as the Tamim Tihiya, B'makom she'ein ish ishtadel ish means, be a mensch, not only in public, be a mensch in private. And that's what Alshich says, Tamim Tihiya im Hashem Elokecha. You should be always, even in a person where there's no one watching, you should follow God properly. You know, they tell a story. There was once, I think I told the story in the class. There was once a rabbi going with his wagon driver, and they drove by a beautiful orchard, luscious fruit. And the wagon driver was not such a great tzaddik. He was an ignorant man, not that religious either, probably. And he stops the wagon and he says to the rabbi, I'm going to steal some fruits over there, but I want you to look. And if somebody is coming, you should scream, yeah, somebody's looking. The rabbi said, okay. The guy went out, the wagon driver went out of the wagon. He went over to a tree. He was about to take off some delicious fruit. The rabbi screams in Yiddish, Mizet, Mizet. They see. The guy right away ran back to the wagon. The wagon driver looks around, he doesn't see anybody. He says to the rabbi, what do you mean they see? The rabbi said to him, God sees. What do you mean? Nobody sees, therefore you can do whatever you want. Like it says in Tan Vina, it's one of the 12 psukim for kids. Hina Hashem nitzav olav, umalecha umabit olav, and God looks at a person every second of the day. So what do you mean nobody sees? So the Alshich says, Tamim Tihiya Hashem Elokecha, you should be complete with God. And then it's interesting, the word Tamim Tihiya, you should be complete or sincere, equals 910. Tamim Tihiya is 910. The word Tishrei, which we're coming to now when this Parsha is read, in Elul before Tishrei, Tishrei also equals 910. So it means, when should a person really be sincere together with Hashem, especially in the month of Tishrei, because that's the month of judgment and the month of, proclaiming God as King and so on. Okay. There's another pasuk in the Parsha. There's a lot of interesting things in the Parsha, by the way. But there's one passage that says when the Jews go to war, here, it says like this: if you go to a city in the time of battle, you're not allowed to chop down the fruit trees. We know even today it's biblically forbidden to chop down. You own a fruit tree in your backyard, you can't just chop it down. Okay, if you need the place to build, it's darkening, it's not producing, whatever. But there's a biblical law, you're not allowed to chop down trees. That's in this week's Parsha. And then it says like this: Ki ha'adam eitz soda. Okay? So I'm not saying what the symbol means. Why? Because you think a person's like a tree. But the pasuk says an expression, Ki ha'adam eitz soda. A person is like the fruit of the field. Eitz soda. A person is like a tree of the field. So the question is, there's inanimate, plant, animal, and human. Okay? So human is on top, animals next, then plant. Why in the world is the Torah using the expression Ha'adam eitz hasadeh? A person is likened to a tree of the field. Why is he likening it to a tree? We're much greater than a tree. And what is a person similar to a tree? Okay. So in various sikhs, the Rebbe explains, usually they talk about this Tu B'Shvat time, the Rosh Hashanah for trees. There's three parts of it, fundamental parts of the tree. There are the roots that are buried in the ground. Then you have the trunk of the tree. And then you have the fruit of the tree. The trunk includes the branches. And then you have the fruit of the tree. These are three fundamental parts of a tree. The roots, which are buried underground. You have the main part of the tree. And then you have the fruits of the tree. The purpose ultimately is for the fruit. You don't plant the tree for the roots. And unless you want to cut down trees for wood, you don't plant the tree. You plant the tree, fruit trees, you plant a tree for fruit. What does that mean in Avodas Hashem and serving Hashem? What are the three parts that a person is likened to the fruit, to a tree of the field? What does it mean that he's likened to the tree of the field? So the Rebbe explains like this: what are the roots? The roots are buried in the ground. They're not noticeable. The roots represent Yirush, the Kabbalah's oil, acceptance of the yoke, Emunah, belief in God. It's not noticeable. It's not your actions. But that's the root. The root, which is the lifeline of the tree, are the roots, which are buried and hidden. It's not the show. It's what's hidden, buried in the ground. Though the roots are the lifeline of the tree. Then you have the trunk of the tree. That's revealed. That represents the life of the person, the Torah mitzvahs of the person. But then there's a third part of the tree, and that's the fruits. And that's what does that mean? Number one, the fruits are the ultimate purpose of the tree. But the fruits have in it another aspect. Those fruits contain within them seeds. The tree doesn't have seeds. The fruit has seeds. You have an apple tree, so you have seeds of the apple. When you take the seeds of the fruit and you plant them, then out comes another apple tree. So what is the purpose of the fruits? Number one, that's the goal, what the dividends and what you're eating, so to speak. But in a deeper sense, the plant of Adam eitz hasadeh, that person's likened to a field. Number one, he has the buried Yerushalayim, Emunah, B'tochen, the belief in God, the fear of God, acceptance of the yoke that's buried deep in the neshama. Then you have the behavior of the person. But then the ultimate of the person is to have continuity, to reproduce. that the fruits, it's interesting. Why did Hashem make the fruit that has seeds that reproduces? Why Hashem could have made it that the tree has seeds that reproduce? Why if it's the fruits? Because the ultimate fruit of the tree is, like Rashi said by tzaddikim, the pay. What are the fruits? Their children, their mitzvahs, their productivity, their continuity. Those things, that is the ultimate level of the tree. And therefore the pasuk says, Ki ha'adam eitz hasada, that a person is likened to the tree of the field. What does that mean? That a person has within him all three parts, and they have to be cultivated. You can't just have a tree. Everybody knows if you own trees, you have a fruit tree. If you don't take care of it, you don't prune it, you don't cultivate it, you don't water it, you don't whatever, it's not going to grow properly. You need to cultivate. But then there's another very important lesson from a tree. Ki ha'adam eitz hasada. You ever notice when they plant trees in the ground, when the city plants trees, they sometimes put two sticks on the side with the wire, from the tree, holding the tree. Why do they do it? Because the tree has to grow straight. The tree has to grow straight. If the tree, when it's young, bends a little bit off, not much, but a little bit off, let's say an inch off, but it keeps going off, then the bigger it grows, or in our language, the older it gets, it's going to be way off the base. It's going to be way off. That's why the pasuk, you have to educate a child in his youth that even when they're young kids, they need to be educated straight. You can't big deal they're kids. Torah says that when a child is the youngest, you have to make sure they grow straight. Proper growth of the roots, of the trunk of the tree, of the fruits of the tree. And you can't say, okay, there's a little bent off, because eventually bent off is going to be a lot bent off. And when as we know in the human body, when the bones are soft, God forbid, your kid dislocates an elbow, a shoulder, or something, the doctor goes, whoop, puts it back. Because they're soft, you can move it. Once the bones get old and hard, then you need surgery. You have to cut the bone. So the important thing is the ha'adam eitz hasada in all these aspects. Number one, the three parts of the tree. Number two, and more important perhaps, is that the tree has to grow straight, because then the tree grows up to be a healthy tree. The child needs to be educated from day one to grow straight. That starts from the earliest of ages of chinuch. Okay, another interesting mitzvah in this week's Parsha is the Torah says you're not allowed to go back to Egypt. Let me just get it. Anyway, the Torah says a Jew is not allowed to go back to Egypt. One of the mitzvahs in the Torah. Now, why? Yeah. You're not allowed to take the Jews back to Egypt. You're not allowed to go back to Egypt. So in fact, there's a negative commandment in the Torah, by the way, that a Jew is not allowed to live in Egypt. That's in this week's Parsha. A Jew is not allowed to live in Egypt. All the commentary, when the Rambam brings down this din, by the way, the Rambam brings it down in Hilchos Malachim at the end of the Rambam. The Rambam brings down this din that a Jew is not allowed to live in Egypt. So all the commentaries ask on the Rambam himself lived in Egypt. There was a famous Rishon called the Radvaz who lived in Egypt. So the answer, how did they were forced by the government. The Sultan forced them to live in Egypt. They had no choice. In fact, the Rambam, in many letters, when he signed his name, the Rambam would sign his name Moshe ben Maimon Asfardi, and sometimes he would add, who transgresses 3 positive mitzvahs a day. I mean, not 3 negative mitzvahs a day. He would write that he tried, but he was forced to, so it's not a problem. But in Shulchan Aruch it said for business you can go there. Now, why is it? By the way, Jews today, there's a lot of leniencies that Jews today can live in Egypt. That's why you have Jewish communities in Egypt. Why? What's the reason for this? And how does it apply to us as individuals? The Arizal says like this, that when the Jews left Egypt, we learned this when we were discussing the Jews left Egypt, they emptied out Egypt. Vayinatzlos Mitzrayim. They emptied out Egypt. So the Arizal says, what does that mean? They took out all the sparks of Kedusha, all the sparks of holiness that existed in Egypt. The Jews, when they went out, left. Which basically means, I don't want to elaborate on it, but very simply, there's something called Shviras HaKelim, the vessels of the world of Tehu broke. 288 sparks of Kedusha fell into this world. 288 sparks of Kedusha, Rapach. And from those sparks, when the Jews left Egypt, and the purpose of those sparks, that Ezel says, it's for the Jew throughout ages to elevate the 288 sparks. When the Jews left Egypt, it says, Erev Rav, Ola Itam, Erev Tarubis, they took out 202 out of the 288. The Jews took out 202 sparks of Kedusha from Egypt. Therefore, the Arizal says, all the sparks of Kedusha are not there. Everything was taken out. Why should a Jew be there? The whole purpose of a Jew to be in a neighborhood, in a city, is to elevate the sparks of Kedusha that are found there. But if all the sparks are not there anymore, so why is a Jew living there? That's what it says. For business, people, new things come from different places. So for business, you can go back. Okay. So now, what does that mean in a personal level, so to speak? So the Torah says, because the purpose of a Jew is to elevate the place they're in. If there's nothing more to elevate, the Jew doesn't belong there anymore. And therefore, it's interesting. As we learned, Hashem plans the footsteps of man. People end up, where do people end up? Where their mission in life is to elevate the sparks. Once, for whatever reason, as Hashem makes them move, that means the sparks of the city where they were are not theirs anymore. They did what they had to do, hopefully, and that's it. But this is the reason why the Arizal explains, why is there a mitzvah in the Torah that you're not allowed to go back to Egypt? The purpose of a Jew is to elevate sparks of Kedusha. The Jews left Egypt, they took all the sparks with them, and therefore there's nothing more to do. Okay, there's another very interesting thing over here. At the end of the Parsha. At the end of the Parsha, the Torah says like this. What happens? Yeah. Okay. The Torah says the following. It's mamish the last halachas of Parsha Shoftim. If you find a corpse, ba'adama, asher Hashem elokecha nesen loch in the land of Eretz Yisrael, neifel basada. You find a corpse in the field. Le'neda mihi kol. You don't know who killed it. Okay? You find a corpse outside the city, in the field, basada. Nobody knows who killed it. So what do? The elders go out, okay, and it's the big Bezdin. They measure to the closest city. They actually measure the whole Gemara, tons of Gemara, how they measure if there's hills and the whole process. They measure with rope, special rope, okay? They measure to the closest city. So this is the city that's closest to the corpse. So the elders of the city, not the big bezdin, now they left. Now the elders of that particular city, which is closest to the corpse, they take and they say like this. Va'anu va'amru. And the elders of the city, they do a whole process. They take an egg calf, chop off its head, and you can plant that area, whatever, a whole process. So they say, va'anu va'amru. The elders say the following at the end of the process. Yodeinu lo yishofchos hadam hazeh. Our hands did not shed this blood. V'eineinu lo ra'u. And our eyes didn't see it. We don't know. We didn't do it. We didn't do it. So Rashi calls it the Gemara in Makis. V'chi also al lev sheziknei. Is anybody going to, I'm sorry, the Gemara in Saita. So will anybody think Bezdin murdered this guy? They're the court, the rabbinic court, Bezdin, holy Jews. What do they come along and they say, our hands did not shed that blood? So Rashi quotes in the Gemara and Saita, that means we didn't see him, and we didn't give him an accompaniment when he left the city. We didn't give him food that he needed. We didn't take care of his needs. And therefore, the fact that he got killed outside our city and we're the closest city that he was killed, we're the closest city to the place he was killed, it's our responsibility and we're guilty. And we have to come along and say, our hands did not shed this blood. What does this mean in the spiritual sense? So the Rebbe explains, we're talking about a spiritual corpse and a spiritual field. It's relevant to interesting to Elul. But anyway, it says like this. The Neifel Basada. What is Sada? Sada represents a field. You remember earlier in Chumash, Yaakov, the passage is Esav ish Sada. Esav was always in the fields. Sada, fields. Yaakov ish Tam Yeshiv Ohalim. Yaakov was learning, not in the fields. Fields represent the Melech HaSada and Elul. The Sada represents not a city. A city represents where people civilize. It's inhabited by people. Adam refers to God. Adam al-Elyon, the God above, the man above, that we're created in his image. Sada represents Esav. So the pasuk is speaking on a spiritual level over here. If it will be found a Jew who's spiritually dead, be very physically strong. He's spiritually dead, and we don't know who killed him. Meaning, we don't know who was the cause that this person did not have a proper upbringing. The person obviously is not religious. He's not, as the pasuk says, you're clinging to God, you're alive. When you disengage from God, you're dead. Misa. You find a spiritual corpse, Neifel Basada, that fell into the hands of an Esav, Isada. But we don't know what to do. So whose fault is it? Whose fault is it that there's a non-religious person around? The Torah says you measure to the closest city, and the elders of that city have to come out and say, we did not shed this blood. It's their fault. Why is it their fault? There's a pasuk that says before about appointing leaders. It says, Vasimim b'rashechem. It simply means I will put them at your heads. The Medrash says Ba'asimim doesn't only mean I'll place them. Ba'asimim is with an aleph. Asham. When people sin, Hashem says, Ba'asimim, when people sin, Berashechem. I'm going to blame the elders. It's the leader's fault. Why didn't they educate that child? Why did they not accompany him? Why did they allow him to end up in the field of Esav, to be spiritually killed without them taking the responsibility? I told you many times, it's a beautiful thing that the Rebbe's approach. There was the shliach in Italy, the head shliach, and they passed away already, was Rabbi Gershom Gorelick. Rabbi Gorelick once gets a phone call, probably 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, from the Rebbe's secretary, Rabbi Chodakov. And Rabbi Chodakov, the phone rings, Rabbi Gorelick picks up in his sleep, he picks up the phone. Rabbi Chodakov says to him, the Rebbe wants to know what you're doing now. The Rebbe wants to know what you're doing now. He said, Rabbi Chodakov, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm sleeping. So Rabbi Chodakov said to him, the Rebbe wants to know, how could you be sleeping if there's a child in Italy that doesn't have a Jewish education? Can you imagine? Guys are right to sleep, no? The Rebbe said to Rabbi Chodakov, the Rebbe wants to know, how can you be sleeping if there's a Jewish kid in Italy that doesn't have a proper Jewish education? So this is the spiritual concept of the mitzvah called Egla Rufa. So again, what do they do? And that's important to the next point I want to mention. What do? They take this calf, okay, in the field, and they chop off the head as if to say, this guy died, he couldn't have any more children, just like this calf, we chop off the head. Okay, that's the din. Earlier in Chumash, in Parsha's Vayechi, when Yosef told the brothers that I'm still alive, go home and tell the father that I'm alive. And he even sent wagons. Okay? The brothers come, and it says, Yaakov did not believe them. What did the brothers tell him? The brothers told Yaakov the following statement in Parshas Vayechi. Yosef is alive and he's the ruler in Egypt. Yaakov said, I don't believe you. He saw the wagons that Yosef sent, even though really Pari sent them. Asher Sholach Yosef, wagons that Yosef sent. So Rashi quotes in the Gemara and Seita, what does that mean? When Yosef left Yaakov Avinu 22 years earlier, when he went to check on the brothers and they kidnapped him and they sold him as a slave, in the whole story, Yaakov and Yosef were learning this parsha of Egla Rufa, the laws of this story. You find a dead body outside the city. Yaakov Avinu is told by the brothers, Yosef's alive meaning not physically. Yosef's alive, like spiritually alive, and he's a leader in Egypt. Yaakov said that is an impossibility. Don't forget, they were shepherds. Only Yosef was able to be in Egypt and be a tzaddik. So what made him believe it? He said, Vayaris saw Golis, he saw the wagons that Yosef sent. But Pari really sent the wagon, not Yosef. So Rashi gets from the Gemara in Saita that Yosef told Yaakov, the brothers, to tell Yaakov, you remember Agolis a wagon, but it's also the same word as Egla. He said, I want you to remember 22 years ago, I remember what we were learning together. I remember it. And that's why he sent wagons, Egla, Agola, it's the same word. So Yosef is telling Yaakov, I'm alive and I'm still a religious Jew. So then, Yaakov believed them. What happened? Yosef's telling why Egel Arufa. Why were they learning Egel Arufa? Because Yaakov understood he's sending Yosef to the brothers. He knew the brothers hated him. He knew it was a dangerous situation. He knew that harm might befall him, and he might end up in Mitzrayim. And who knows, the most corrupt land in the world. Yaakov Avinu was learning with Yosef, especially this Parsha, this week's Parsha, Egel Arufa, the end of the Parsha, because he wanted Yosef to know, I am going with you. I'm accompanying you. It's not, and therefore Yosef was not Neifel Basoda. Yosef did not die like an Esav from Yiddishkeit. And he saw the wagon, and that's why Yosef said that I'm not falling prey in Mitzrayim in the Soda. I still remember the Torah that we learned. Then Vatchiroch Yaakov Avinu. So what is the lesson, so to speak, from this? A Jew always has to be connected to the source. Like the tree, by the way, I should have mentioned this before. What's the uniqueness of a tree? Plant life only grows when it's connected to the source. Once you cut it from the source, it doesn't grow anymore. The same thing with Egel Arufa. A Jew has to be connected to the source, to Torah mitzvahs, to tzaddikim. They need to be connected to the source, and then they can continue growing. If you're connected to the source, then you don't have Neifel Basoda. Then you don't have somebody dying in the field, God forbid, falling prey to Esav, that who knows what can happen. And that's why they were learning, and that's the lesson for us from all the things we discussed in the Parsha, is to live with the Torah, living Torah, and then we end up not being Neifel Basoda, but we have Shoftim v'Sheitrim, as it says before Mashiach. When Mashiach comes, we're going to go back to the old system. Okay, that's enough for today. Mr. Shem, Wednesday night, don't forget, 8:30 is Halach and Tanya. Until then, everybody have a great 2 days, and the Mr. Shem will see you. Take care.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.